Yep.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly guide professionalism and education live show. This is something we're trying to do every week to bring on guests from around the rafting industry to talk about guiding and professionalism and just best practices. I'm really excited about this in part because I feel like it's good for me personally. Like I can learn from this. I think it's good for my guide crew, but anybody who's willing to listen. So everybody who's taking part, I really appreciate it, and thank you for being a part of this. At the end, we'll have time for discussions and questions. So if you have a comment, just put it down in the comment box below. And before we start, I want to introduce Mark. I first learned of Mark because I was really revamping our safety talks, what Mark calls a safety demonstration. And I just Googled rafting safety talk just to learn more about it. And I found his blog. And personally, I really liked his writing style, but also just his take on guiding and was really impressed. So I stalked him online and found him and learned more about the IRF through him, and decided that I want to do an IRF training. And it took me, I think, a year for us to connect. And I finally, Mark came over to the United States and did an IRF training for myself and a bunch of our guides. And I was just very impressed by Mark's just his focus on safety, professionalism, and just his breadth of knowledge. And so for me, he's my assessor. I'm working towards being a fully ready to go IRF instructor. He's my assessor and somebody that I look to when I have questions in the guiding world, and somebody I really respect. So I'm really excited to have you here. And Mark's going to talk about global practices for commercial rafting operations. And before we start, I want to mention these are his experiences traveling around the world. It's not like he's sitting in one place and making these up. He's seen a lot of stuff in a lot of places. And I know a lot of us in the United States, we feel like what we're doing now is the way. And through Mark, I've learned there's just been a lot of innovation around the world that we can bring to our own operations. And so I'm personally taking a lot from what he's bringing and adapting to us, and I hope others can. So with that, welcome to the show, Mark. Welcome
Hey.
back to the show.
Yeah. Thanks for having me again, Zach.
Yeah.
And you know what? The thing that sprung to mind then was I think I failed English literature when I was in secondary school. If someone to go read my work online that's the biggest shock. Never mind all the rafting stuff. That's amazing. Wow. Thank you. Yeah, and it's great to be back. Hopefully we can have a good discussion today and we can talk about a few things. So yeah. Can take it. You can see my keynote presentation up on the
Yep,
screen.
looks great. Looks great.
Right. Should we crack on then?
Let's go. Oh, before the thing I
Sure.
want to mention, I forgot to mention, I can now pronounce your company name. Mark's company does guide training and rescue training and ice rescue training even through Rescue 3 and the International Rafting Federation, and it's pronounced Lapin Koski Kolu.
Very good.
All
Do
right.
you know what it means?
You told me once and I forgot. It means wild rivers flowing through the mountains.
No, it doesn't. It's Lapin is Lapland from Finland, where I live. Koski
Okay.
is the Finnish word for rapid, and Koulu is the Finnish word for school. So you were close. You got rivers in there, which was good.
I'm not sure I told you this. I'm half Finnish, so I should
Yeah,
know
yeah,
that.
yeah. We'll get you over here paddling one day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right then. So thanks for joining everyone. And yeah, let's go through this. And just before we go through this presentation, I just want to make one thing clear. Yes, I am an IRF assessor. The views that I share today are my views as a traveled global raft guide and someone that teaches rafting and trains a lot of people. They're not necessarily the views of the IRF. So just keep an open mind. We're just going to go through this presentation, and I'll discuss a few points, and then we can all have a little bit of a conversation at the end. So this whole um, subject came about a month or so back when I was on Zach's first show, and Zach asked me, or I think sorry, one of the listeners asked if there is anywhere in the world where there is the best global common practice for rafting operations, and there isn't. Um, Myself personally, I get to raft and teach raft guide courses in around 15 different countries per year. And I've traveled all around the world delivering raft guide courses. and I also get to see a lot of operations on the river. So I think I'm in a pretty good place to discuss some of the things that happen around the world, and most of all, some of the things that should happen around the world. So really, it's an opportunity for us to share knowledge. So let's move on. First slide here. Failure to prepare, prepare to fail. I think this is key really throughout the rafting world. There's many people that set a rafting business up and they don't understand the industry that they're getting into, which at the end of the day really is going to fail. Going to make them fail in the long run. Something I want everybody to hold into mind today is that, and this is this was brought home to me a few years ago in Costa Rica at the World Whitewater Rafting Summit, and there's actually more unprofessional cowboy rafting in the world than there is professional rafting at this moment, which is quite scary for me if you think on a global scale. Um, if you think about your typical river, you're going to get maybe 3 or 4 good professional companies. You're going to get the companies that are aspiring to be professional, that want to be up there, and then you're going to get your companies that are not so professional and don't have the best operations. So the actual companies that are in that very small percentage of doing everything right and being responsible companies and practicing really good operations is a very small, slim amount compared to the amount of people that are not as safety conscious as we would think. So 3 main areas I've split this up into. We're going to have a look at the best global practice in rafting operations. We're going to talk a little bit about equipment standards and then training standards. So let's start it off. So commercial rafting operations. What are the current best global practices? Something I tend to see a lot when I go on rivers is one boat trips. So 6, 7, 8 customers in a boat, one guide, no safety kayakers. So if anything happens on that trip to the guide, maybe he has a worst case scenario heart attack, falls out of the boat, hits his head on a rock, knocks himself out, or becomes incapacitated. If that is a one boat trip, there's one guide who is then going to take care of the customers if anything happens to that guide. Likewise, if you're on a class 3 or class 4 river, there's some countries in the world where they raft class 4 with one boat and one guide. If you have a flip and the guide gets separated from the raft, you're leaving yourself wide open. It's not good customer care. So for me, best global practice is to avoid one boat, one guide trips. If you're going to have a one boat trip, you're going to have to use a safety kayaker. I often get asked, well, can we have 2 guides in the raft? I think that would depend on the river and the experience of the guide. But for me personally, I would prefer to have a safety rafter, a safety kayaker, and that way you've got 2 guides on the trip. Next one, most people will look at this and say it's a no-brainer. All commercial rafting participants are to be drug and alcohol free during a commercial trip. And for most people, that is a no-brainer. But unfortunately, there are places in the world where alcohol plays a huge part of the day trip. I've been to rivers where I've seen customers grabbing a PFD, a helmet, and getting onto a raft with a case of beer. So this is something you've got to look at, and I think it's best common practice that we try not to have drunk and people under the effects of drugs on our trips, and that also includes guides that have been to the bar the night before. Your guides need to be sober and be professional. Next one. All commercial operators are obliged to inform the rafting participants of the level of risk exposure during the planned trip and record this. So basically, you're telling your customers what to expect and what the trip is going to be like. I've been to plenty of places around the world where the customers have signed up for rafting, they've gone on the river, and they've got off, and the trip isn't what they expected. They've expected to go for a nice class 1, class 2 cruise, and the end been given a class 4 trip, and they're scared. And so I think operators need to be able to honestly tell the customers what to expect for the day. And again, also happens on the other foot is that trips get oversold. Class 5 rafting when it's really a class 3 trip. So I think operators need to find a way to be honest with the way that they sell their trips. Next one, going back to what I just mentioned on the first point, safety kayaks or rescue crafts need to be used where possible on trips. Many years ago, I spent a lot of time out in Nepal, and you would get kayakers turning up, and they would say, "Yeah, we'll be your safety kayak on the rafting trip." And you generally get a boat flipping upside down, and you people that you've brought along to be safety kayakers don't have the skill level to be able to make a rescue. So, as an offshoot of this, the IRF, they saw the need to have trained rescue people within a trip. So we came up with the Safety Kayak and the Rescue Craft Awards, which are designed for safety kayakers and rafters. It's a set of tests of competence. At the end of it, you have a certificate that says you are a skilled kayaker on level 3, level 4 whitewater. So having a safety kayaker as a profession as part of your trip is going to make your trip a lot safer. All commercial operators are to give a full risk/safety demonstration before a trip commences. The safety talk, as we've called it for years. I've been around the world and I've seen a lot of safety demonstrations done on a loud bus where the customers can't hear or see. Don't understand a demonstration on a bus because the guide doesn't share a common language with the guests. So, having a proper pre-trip safety demonstration is key to a good trip, and this should happen all over the world. Unfortunately, it doesn't. All commercial operators are to attain any pre-existing medical conditions and swimmability of the participants before a commercial trip begins. So, as a commercial operator, you're getting to find out if your customers can swim, if they have any medical conditions before you get on the water. This is going to help you in case you have a problem. You see so many people getting on the water, you see a flip, somebody pulled up on the side, short of breath, potential asthma attack, and the guide says, "Why didn't you tell me that you had asthma?" And that could easily have been done if the companies would get this information before a trip begins. All commercial operators are to document a suitable standard operating procedure and emergency action plan for the proposed rafting trips. So this is having a set of documents, systems, so that when you're on a trip, you know how your trip works. And if you have an emergency scenario, your guides and your entire team have a document to work off, and that you train this into your staff, which is really important. So that comes into the next point. All commercial operators are to train their staff in the standard operating procedure and emergency action plan for the proposed rafting trip. This is operators being responsible for their operation. I've seen so many times when you've had a rafting company that's made up of freelance guides, something happens on the river and there's no support for the guides. The guides don't know what to do. So for me, this is negligence on behalf of the operators. All trips are to be suitably equipped with correctly maintained operating equipment and emergency equipment needed for the trip. How many times have I been around the world, and I've always make a point now when I go to a company to look at a first aid kit, and how many times have I found a wet, damp, nasty first aid kit or insufficient emergency equipment? Your customers are coming, they're paying you money for you to safely take them down the river. And by not maintaining or not having the correct rescue equipment, you're just leaving yourself wide open as an operator. For me personally, when I go to a place, I want to see this equipment. I want to see it's in good working order. you can generally gauge from by seeing this equipment, you can gauge what type of company you're dealing with. So for me, a good global practice is, for operators to have the right emergency and the right operating equipment on the river. And then the next one, all operators employ suitably and competent guides and staff on the river. You go to a lot of places and the owners of your companies are not rafters. They're not guides. They're not water people. They're business people. And unfortunately, all they see are people coming through the door and paying money, and they don't care about the product or the trip that they're giving. And these are your short-term rafting companies. They're not going to last long purely because the quality of the trip that they offer is really poor. By investing time and money into the training of the guides, you're going to give a better product, a safer product, and it's better for the sustainability of the industry. By not having trained guides, by not having certified guides, by not having competent guides, it's not sustainable. So that's pretty much everything in the commercial rafting operations. We'll talk about equipment standards now. For me personally, rafts need to be suitably outfitted with minimal entrapment hazards. And I know this is one of Zach's main things. When we talk about an entrapment hazard, we talk about a loop of rope or a trailing line that somebody could get entrapped in if the raft flips, if they fall out the raft, or just generally sitting in the raft. You go to some countries and there's more rope in the bottom of the boat than there is in the throw bag, because of the poorly designed equipment. Some companies on certain rivers, they produce the rafts, and the rafts just have massive entrapment hazards all over, and that's because the boats are not made for that environment. They've been designed by people that don't really know too much about rafting. All helmets and PFDs are to be certified to a national or international standards, and PPE is to be tested each season. So we know that when we're going to a place, you're going to get a white water helmet. You're going to get a internationally certified. You're going to get a PFD with a certification on it. And I think it looks good for the customers because they're going to, in fact, no, I know it's going to look good for the customers because you're giving them a piece of equipment that's good for the job. It's also good for the operators that, you're giving out equipment that has been rated and it has been tested. There are operators that, are making domestic PFDs that don't actually do the job that they're supposed to do. Or might be that you go to a place where the customers will be doing multiple sports during the day and the helmet they're wearing won't be a water sports approved helmet, CE 1385 helmet. And if that customer has an accident, an injury to the head, and they're not wearing a helmet that's certified for the job, again, the operators are leaving themselves wide open. And then again, PFDs and helmets to be tested each season. You get out there and test your PFDs and record that. You go to so many places where you see PFDs that are not good enough for the job. A PFD that doesn't do its job can have dire consequences. So, this stuff needs to be tested. And if the owners of the company are not prepared to take this on themselves, the guides really should be able to stand up and test the PFDs themselves. All guides are to be suitably equipped to operate in a professional capacity. So, we often talk about carrying 4-3-2-1, 4 carabiners, 3 pulleys, 2 pro 6, and a flip line, which is great if you're on a river where you might be dealing with a pin. If you're on a big volume river where you're not going to have a pin, your guides need to be carrying that. What you do need to have is that your guides are suitably equipped to operate professionally. So what does that mean? It means a helmet, a PFD, a knife, a whistle, a throw bag, so they can do their job properly, and they've got bare minimum of tools to be able to do their job. I'm sure you can go onto YouTube and you can see a number of videos of somebody entrapped, and all it would take would be a knife to cut a rope, and you've got a group of guys that don't have a knife between them. Or for me personally, you see a lot of videos of rafting in the summer, and you're watching a raft guide, and you've got a guide that's not got a throwback, not got a rescue harness on the PFD. They're wearing a low cut slalom PFD. So you're asking yourself, they've not got a whistle, they've not got a knife. And for me, that just screams out a guide that's not prepared in case there is an issue on the river. So you've got to be prepared for the river. Another classic one I see is guides that will give a customer a wetsuit and they'll say the water's cold. And the next thing you'll see is a guide in a pair of board shorts and a t-shirt, which is great. But the moment you have an accident, that guide has to be sat in the water with a guest or on the river for an amount of time. It means that guide's going to be getting cold because they've not got the correct equipment on, because they want to look cool, they don't want to wear a wetsuit. And then once your guide can't do the job properly, they stop taking care of the customers. So guides have got to have the correct equipment. All transport to the river and commercial trips are to be equipped with a first aid kit. It seems like common sense, but it's not. And I've seen so many trips where there's no first aid kit, or where there is a bag that says first aid and you open it up and there's no first aid kit or such in there. It just screams unprofessionalism to me, which is a common practice. You should have a first aid kit in on your trip, and then also in your transport. If you're rafting, for instance, a lot of the Asian countries, actually getting to the river can be the most dangerous part of the trip. So as a trip leader, when I'm guiding, I'll have my first aid kit that I use on the river, and then that same first aid kit is in my pellet case sat next to me on the bus in case there's an accident on the bus, and I have actually had to use this. So they're the equipment standards. And then finally, training standards. This is an interesting one. Guides are to be suitably trained in three main areas. Be a good professional guide, you've got to be in three main areas. Trained in three areas. You've got to have first aid training, a whitewater rescue certificate, and technical guiding skills. I see so many times when you see an advert for a guide position, it says the guide must have first aid and a whitewater rescue certificate. And then there's nothing that tests the guide's guiding skills. A swiftwater rescue certificate is not a guide. Is not a guide certificate. The skills you cover on a whitewater rescue course do not teach you how to guide a raft. And then if you do a guiding specific course, you don't necessarily get all of the whitewater rescue skills needed to be proficient in whitewater rescue. So the three main areas: first aid certificate, whitewater rescue certificate, and a technical guiding certificate, such as a New Zealand Rafting Association certificate and IRF certificate. So we've got those core three certificates. I've just pretty much mentioned the next point. Now, so I'll go on to the next one. Guided to understand the importance of maintaining current valid qualifications. So, you get a lot of guides out there that will do a first aid, and they'll say, yeah, I've got a first aid, and then you'll ask to see the certificate, and they'll say, oh, it's out of date, or they don't feel the need to keep updated on their training, which is pretty good for what we're doing now, Zach, because hopefully guides will keep updated on their training by watching shows like this. But yeah, you've got to keep on top of your training. You've got to keep on top of the current standards. So many guides out there will say, yes, I've got a first aid certificate. But in the past 12 months, the way we teach CPR because of COVID is going to change forever. So you've got to keep up on top of your first aid qualification. You've got to keep that rescue certificate up to date. You've got to keep that guiding certificate up to date, because if you're working as a professional guide, if you've not got those certificates, are you truly a professional guide? And then going to whitewater rescue course, I think it's common practice now is that if you're a raft guide and you are working with rafting customers, don't do a rescue course for firemen. Go and do a rescue course for river guides. I think a lot of water rescue courses have lost credibility in certain countries because guides will go and do a course with a group of firemen and they'll get bored because the standards are not the standards that they need. So the way you teach a fireman in the moving water is different from what you teach a raft guide. It's a totally different skill set. So do training that is specific to the job that you're doing. And up-to-date training is part of the professional development of a river guide. So that's more or less everything I wanted to say there, really. So back over to you, Zach.
Thanks, Mark. Well, if anybody who's watching has questions from Mark, you can go ahead and put it in the comment section below. I wrote down a bunch of questions as we're going, so I'm just going to hit you with these, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned safety kayaks and craft when possible. Do you feel like they should, like, you should always have them, or can you run safely, responsibly, which is good boat spacing and order?
If it's a one boat trip, you want to have your
Yeah. But if you're like 5 boats, in that case, do you feel like you should always have a safety kayak or safety craft?
Yeah. I mean,
Really?
good boat spacing, you can do it, but if, let's say, for instance, you're on a 5 boat trip, if something happens to that first boat and you get a raft that flips, anything happens to that first boat, you're going to get a swimmer that is going to go downstream quicker.
Yeah.
That second boat is going to have to paddle past the raft that's flipped, pick up guests, and in that time, that downstream swimmer is getting further and further away. Your safety boats, your safety raft, your safety cat, your safety kayak are your ultimate downstream rescue, the ultimate downstream cover. So yeah, I prefer to use them.
I mean, rivers that we do a lot are pool drop. So if the first boat flips, they're going to be in a pool at the bottom.
Yeah,
so in that case, it's not as big. I'm guessing it's not as big of a deal.
It's not as big a deal, but if you work on a more continuous or on class 3 and above, you definitely want to have a measure. I must be honest, a lot of my work is on class 3 and above, so for me, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. Here's a question from Willie Bum Bum. I don't think, can you see these questions, Mark?
Yeah.
Or do you read them out to you? Got a dress from the rescue. Personal day bag with first aid should be standard. That was one of my questions actually too. Was should every guide have their own first aid kit? Is that like a part of a guide's equipment?
Should every guide have their own first aid kit, or should every boat have a first aid kit? Does a guide have to provide his own personal first aid kit, or is it provided by the company they're working for? It depends on the operator. It depends where you are. I don't really believe in guides providing their own first aid kit. One, because of the expense, and two, you're going to get a guide who's going to turn up with his grandma's secret remedy for healing sunblock. Skin off. It's going to happen at some point, or rubber gloves that he used on the last person had broke themselves.
Yeah. I mean, that leads me to my next question, actually, on that same line of questioning. With first aid kits, who comes up with the list? Is there like a global standard for what a first aid kit list should be? Or is it just something you buy online and you call it a first aid kit?
I think it should be your first aid kit should be applicable to the river that you're running. And the owners of the company should be managing the first aid training for the guides, looking at the risk and building their first aid kit around the risks, the likelihood that you're going to be using. So I don't think the first aid kit that I carry when I'm rafting in Iceland would be a lot different than the first aid kit that somebody's carrying in, say, Africa on the river. You're going to have the basis. You're going to have a lot of the same stuff, but maybe someone who's working in Africa might have something for insect stings, bites, and whatever. Whereas my first aid kit that I have in Iceland is going to have maybe a little bit more stuff for the cold, hypothermia, or sharp rocks, cuts and sharp rocks.
Is there any sort of standard though? I mean, first aid kits should have ibuprofen, aspirin, stuff for splinting, or even that? Is it just like depends on the country? Or it's always going to be different?
For me, it's something to stop a bleed, support an injured limb, provide a barrier for CPR. and stop a bleed, support a limb in the base. You go to some countries you can't carry aspirin, you can't carry ibuprofen. Also, you've got to look in the scope of the training that the guides have. What's the point in having airways, having fancy stuff if the guides don't have training in how to use it? So I would look at the training that the guides have and then build a first aid kit around that training.
Yeah. I mean, it's something I've worked hard on our list. I'm just wondering if somebody didn't, like, how does somebody start that process? Is it just as an owner or a guide, how do they start their first aid kit?
As an owner or a guide, you as an owner, you're going to do your own first aid training somewhere, and the people that are providing your first aid training or your first aid manual will have the content of what you need, and you can build yourself from that.
Let's go back, Willie Bum Bum. Thanks for the comments. One boat, yeah. I mean, I feel the same. Like a one boat trip, like a kayak isn't even enough, because if you flip and 6 people swim, a kayak can only get 1 person. So
yeah, I mean, if you've got a good kayak and you get a one boat trip and a flip, I mean, I can be that kayak. The kayaker doesn't necessarily have to be the person that rescues everyone. If they've had a good safety brief, it's a flip. If they've had a good safety brief, it's get yourself back to the raft, and that safety kayaker can clean up downstream. Or the safety kayak, from their kayak, they can grab 1 or 2 swimmers and they can verbally command other swimmers to get back to the raft. I agree. Some places, yeah, a raft will work better. For me, a kayak is a lot more maneuverable and can do the job. I come from a safety kayaking background, so I've got a problem from that.
Yeah, I mean, Willie Bum Bum, I did the safety kayak training with Mark, and the things he had us do it took a high level of skill of a kayaker, not just your ability to run rapids, but mid rapid, he would tell the guide to stop guiding and tell the kayaker had to get out of the kayak and in the raft and take control of the raft. It was some challenging stuff. So I think if a raft flipped with the safety kayaker, that safety kayaker could theoretically get on the upside down raft, flip it over, pull the passengers in if the guide was, yeah. I mean, that's the high level of training they would expect. Just like a normal kayaker off the street probably couldn't do much, but somebody who's trained in practice could do more.
And for me as well, a big thing for me when I'm working with a safety kayaker as well is that a safety kayaker needs to know the team they're guiding with. They need to know, the strong points, the weak points of each of the guides, and they need to know. They literally need to be able to paddle that river backwards with their eyes closed. I know every twist and turn of the river so they can safety kayak it properly.
I'm not personally that comfortable with a one boat trip and a safety kayaker personally, but I see with the level of training you put into safety craft how it could work. I just worry you flip and 6 people can't get back to the boat, and you have. I just worry about 6 people in the water, and I don't know how to handle that. That works for you. The what?
That works for you, but as long as you've got some form of backup, you could bring yourself.
Yep. Or at least think it through. Like, what if this on this river? If it's a class 3 river with pull drop, then I think a safety kayaker is fine. Here in the Northwest, we have pretty continuous rivers as our day trips, and if there was a flip on some of these rivers, 6 people would just go. Yeah, right? They'd have a hard time holding on, and in some of the rapids, they couldn't hold on to the raft because they would just be so turbulent. I will keep plugging in my questions. Billy Bum Bum, thanks for the good questions. So same thing with standard you said, companies should have standard operating procedures. How does somebody come up with that? Like, where does that come from? Is there like a global standard, or is there a template somebody can use to create a standard operating procedure?
Oh, that's a good question that you said up there. We've got, with the IRF coming out soon, we've got the ROA system, which is a system for operators to be able to get IRF accreditation for companies. And part of that is the companies will have to provide an SOP and an emergency action plan. If they don't have any experience in doing that, we can give them a template so that they can produce their own. I think anyone that's setting up as the owner of a rafting company, my own personal view, if you're going to set up a rafting company and you don't know how to write a standard operating plan for a rafting company, you might need to hire some help in.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I've done it a bunch of times, so I know at this point. But the first time I had to do it, I didn't even know what went into it, right? Like I
Yeah.
didn't even know. I'm like, where do I even start? What goes in this thing? So just having like a template would have helped me a lot the first time.
Yeah, I mean they're provided. That there are templates out there, and part of the system we have with the IRF is that we'll give you a template. You'll also get access to an assessor, someone like myself, who can guide you along the
Yeah.
way.
Destin writes standard operating guidelines. I think Destin likes the word guidelines a lot because sometimes they get deviated from. I think
Yeah,
I'm guessing that's what you're putting. Ours are pretty straightforward. You wouldn't really deviate from them. Like where we
yeah,
launch, how many guides per trip. Like they are pretty. They're You would read them, Destin, if you haven't seen them. I mean, Destin works for me, so if he doesn't know them, then that's bad training on my part. But you would read them and say, this is really obvious stuff. It's not
yeah.
stuff where it doesn't go super in depth on like when to throw a bag or how to set up a tarp. It's really general stuff. I'll have to share it with you, Destin. So next, emergency. Sorry, let me go back. Standard operating procedure and then emergency action
Action
plan are
plan.
two different things.
Yeah,
Two different documents. Got it. I just wanted to
yeah.
make sure of that. And then with emergency equipment, you mentioned emergency equipment. I'm going to dive into some of these things because I think people want to know what's standard. For emergency equipment, is there standard stuff that everybody should, what does that entail? Is it pin
For me as a
kit?
kit leader,
Yeah.
pin
What
kit,
is the emergency kit? Yeah.
first aid kit, warm kit, communications kit, and that can either be in one boat, one big kit, or your pin kit can be in one boat, first aid kit in another boat. But yeah, they can be spread out.
So pin kit, warm kit, and
Depending on your
communication.
operating. Yeah.
Yeah, because like on the
First
road
aid.
it's 100 degrees out, so we're not gonna have warmth. But if
Yeah.
it's a spring river that we do, we're gonna have like we call it a hypo kit, short
Yeah.
for hypothermia.
Hmm.
See what Halder writes. I think it said pre-planning should be in place for rivers that are operated, possible extract points, communications. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Trevor writes, how do you feel about companies who have very specific lines through rapids as part of their SOP?
I've worked for those companies, and I've seen those companies, and it's when I get those companies, I think you look at that and you think, wow, that's good. These guys, this is tight, this is good. But for whatever reason, on whatever day, if a guide runs a different line through a different rapid and has an accident, is that company going to support him? Is he going to get the support from his? Is the owner of the company going to say, well, we said that you run X rapid on the left and you just run it on the right, so therefore we're not going to give you any support? It's that might be going a little bit. I mean, obviously, if there's a massive hazard in the rapid that says this rapid must be run on the left, yeah, I understand, but you'll get some companies that can be go into a little bit too much detail.
Yeah, some of this stuff. So like that's not a standard operating guidelines. We have procedures that are like it's pretty straightforward stuff, like I said. And then we have guidelines that talk about how to run rapids. Like things that we typically do. On the Rogue River,
Yeah,
we have to portage some of the rapids, have our guests walk around. So we explain how to do that, but we give
hmm
them leeway. Like let's say something changed, like the water's low or it's
yeah,
high. We have leeway to make good decisions. So those are guidelines. Like to me, how to run certain rapids are in the guideline world. They're not in this standard
no,
they're not in the
yeah.
document.
I think as
Again,
well as if you put out a document that has really specific stuff like that, you're hanging yourself out to dry if you have an accident.
yeah.
You've got to cover the basics and be vague.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have it. So we call it our operating plan.
Hmm.
So it's first just operating plan. We have to turn it into the Forest Service, right? But
Yeah.
so the operating plan doesn't say how to run rapids. We have separate things that we train on that talk
Hmm.
about how to do certain things. All right, and then so I think a lot of people too are curious just about like global standards. Is there a certain length of a throw bag, for example, that like people around
No,
the world think is best?
no. And people will put this. Yeah, it's one of the questions I always ask when I do a rescue class. What length should your throwback be? And at the end of the day, it's a length of rope that you're happy to throw and you can competently throw. There's no point giving a 10 or a 12 mil, 50 meters of 10 or 12 mil rope to a small guy who's not going to be able to throw it. A throw bag length is an amount that you can throw, but in Austria, there is a standard length. I think it's 20 meters. All guides must have a 20-meter throw bag on them, and that's law.
Wow.
So it's global. I worked in a company. I worked in a company. I was running an assessment a few years ago, and the guides were really good at guiding the boat. And we did the throwback section of the IRF test, and they all laughed at me. And I asked them why they were laughing, and they said they've never thrown a throwback before. And these guys have been guiding for 5 or 6 years. And they said we don't have any throwbacks in our company, so we've never used one before. So it's global.
So having throw bags is a global, would you say it was like a global standard, but not what the throw bag consists of is?
Yeah.
Okay.
And having a throwback can be a loose description as well compared to some of the throwbacks I've seen in some other places around the world. Very loose description.
Same thing. I mean, we're going to go into, I'm probably going to sidetrack us a little bit here. Let's talk about rescue PFDs. But do you feel like it's a global standard that guides wear rescue PFDs?
I see we're going to crunch now. Is that personally for me? Yeah. If you're working as a guide on a river, you are expected to be a guardian of that river environment. You're expected to be able to carry out rescues. By not having a rescue PFD as a guide, you're limiting the amount of rescue. You're limiting your capability in a rescue.
So if guides should have rescue PFDs, then they also, I mean, you can't really use a rescue PFD without swiftwater rescue training. So by that logic, you should also have swiftwater rescue training as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Would you let somebody be a chef without having any knife training?
Would you let somebody be a chef? Yeah, no, I'm with you on training 100%. I don't think it's, I mean, around the world, what percentage of guides do you think have taken swiftwater rescue training?
Not as many.
Yeah, like 10%, 20%.
I would say 20 and above.
Yeah, so we have a long way to go.
Something you've got to look at as well is that, have these guys taken swiftwater rescue training? I go to lots of places. Do these guys have access to swiftwater training?
Yeah.
Do these guys have access? I mean, even for you guys in the States, do they have access to the correct swiftwater training or whitewater rescue training? For instance, over here in Europe, if you're a raft guide, you do a whitewater rescue technician. And somebody that's a whitewater rescue technician is taught by a rafter or a kayaker. If you're a fireman and you don't have any rafting or kayaking skills, you don't work with river and raft guides. And I know that's not the case in the States where you are. So, it's good to be able to have access to the training.
Yeah, I mean, we have access to training, but it won't always be like, sometimes it is like, I can only fit these dates in. I'm going to do a class with a bunch of firefighters just to check off the box.
Yeah.
Like
something
like that happens a lot. But, for me, I mean, of course, as an outfitter, I want every one of my guides to have rescue training, a woofer, and ideal IRF certificate, right? That would be a goal. It's a lot to ask somebody their first season guiding to spend all the money and take all those courses, the first year or two guiding. Or do you feel like, nope, you do it. If you want the job, that's what you need to do?
I think that for me, if I was the owner of a company and I was taking on fresh new guides that don't have first aid, don't have whitewater rescue, don't have guide tickets, I think for me, I'd be working at a deal so that they can get access to that training at a discounted rate and get the training. Lots of countries in the world where you don't have the training, you're not getting the work. You don't have the bits of paper, you can't work on the river. So
would you prioritize woofer or swiftwater rescue? Like, is one more? If they did one, would you feel like one's more important than the other?
No, I want both.
They're equivalent.
Yeah, And you talk about a woofer, and woofer is a great American standard, but it's only really you can get woofers in Europe, but it's woofer is a great standard in the States, but it's very hard to be able to do a woofer course in Europe. There's not that many that get run. They are run, but there's not that many. So it's again different standards, different parts of the world. For instance,
I mean,
Bosnia, you can't get first aid courses.
you can't what?
You can't. I mean, in Bosnia, it's very hard to be able to get on a first aid course. They don't have that many first aid courses.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, I think with more people trying to provide online training, there could be an opportunity for people anywhere to get something, some basic knowledge.
hmm
For me, we do overnight trips, and it's mostly like class 3. And so when I look at accidents where we have problems, it's mostly
always in the camp.
first aid things. Like we have very few switchwater accidents, right?
hmm
But when we have accidents, it's like somebody has a kidney infection, or they're showing symptoms of a heart attack, or somebody broke their leg. Like we have that, that kind of stuff. So for me, for what we're doing, I have way more value first aid training because that's where we see the most
Yeah,
accidents.
yeah.
But that's just about how I see it.
I
Um,
as well. I think for me as well is if you've not got the opportunity where each of your guides has got first aid and a whitewater rescue certificate, I would at least insist in a trip leader having your trip leader having all
yeah,
three.
yeah, yep, I agree with that. I know, the thing too about it's nice to So for me, I want everybody to have it. I realize some people it's like a huge financial burden and hard, and we can hopefully do things to make it possible for them to do it. But sometimes it's hard for people to do that much training before starting their first year or two as a guide. So
Yeah.
I have a little empathy towards that. But these are team rescues. You can't just have, if just one person has a woofer, it's not enough. These
hmm
whenever you're doing a rescue, it takes everybody having the same skill set to work as a team. Or like being on a switchwater rescue, like it's not just one person can just take charge.
Yeah.
Everybody has to have the skills. So I see the value of everybody having it because these are team rescues are team events, not individual events.
Jim Coffey, the owner of Esprit Rafting in Canada, he has a great saying, and he says that rescue is a team sport, and I'm a strong
Yeah.
believer in that. You
Yep.
know, how many things
Yep.
do you practice on a first on a rescue course where it takes 2 or 3 competent people to be able to pull a rescue off?
Yep. Yep. So we used to. I mean, when I started in this, it was like trip leaders had to have these certifications, but now I really feel like everybody should have them. Because
Yeah. So
again,
what you can do if something happens to the trip leader?
yeah, yeah, good point. So Alex writes, can you discuss about how regulations change from state to state and country to country, and how that impacts the quality of guides and trips? Does more regulation result in higher standards? Mark, I'm gonna let you take
Uh,
that one.
yeah. In Europe, you've got a small area, so many different countries, and it's practically impossible to be able to work as a guide in each of those countries because they each have their own laws, bylaws, qualifications, um, and it definitely impacts the quality of the guides. For instance, if you go to Austria, they've got a very good training system in Austria. France has a good training system, not quite as good as the Austrians. For me, guiding around the world, working around the world, you speak to a guide and you ask them where are they from. You can expect a certain standard of guide from the country that they're from, and you can expect a certain skill set from those guides. So yeah, it does differ. I've worked New Zealand, worked all over. Generally, if you get a guide that comes out of California, we've got a pretty good skill set. I've worked with guides, and I'm not saying all guides, but I've worked with guides out of Colorado, probably not the same skill set, different standard of guides. So yeah, there's definitely a different quality of guides depending on where they're from in the world. Um, does more regulations result in higher standards? I would say it results in awareness of higher standards, not necessarily doesn't create higher standards, but people are aware of higher standards of rafting.
Yeah, Alex, I would just add on to that. State to state, the government's not very good at coming up with good standards. So whenever the government puts standards on us as outfitters, they usually just create paperwork and work for us, which means less time for training. So I don't think that state to state increasing regulations creates higher standards. And the case for that is California. California has the lowest level of standards to be a guide in the United States. There's nothing. You don't have to do anything to be a guide in California. But as Mark just said, like some of the best guides come from California. And Colorado, there are some companies that have amazing guides. Like I know a few companies that I will hire from in a heartbeat because they have a really good in-house program. So my thing is like I don't think the government standards necessarily do it, but I think what it does is just like a level of professionalism in the industry.
Okay.
Mark, your audio is doing something weird. Mark, I don't think your microphone's working. Oh, you're muted. Let me take you off mute. Mike, Mark, it looks like your mic is unconnected. Or yeah. Did your headphones die? Your headphones might have lost batteries or lost connection. So while we're waiting for Mark, Willie Bum Bum just writes a comment. There's a difference between the Swiftwater Rescue cert versus really understand the concepts. We tend to dump knowledge after certs. I mean, I think it's hard to know to remember these things if you never use it. And so on a class 3 river, if you take a class and you never actually use the things, it's hard to remember it. Where some guides take a class and they use this stuff every day and they retain it really well. That's my take. Mark, we still can't hear you. Oh, yep, that's better.
Yeah. I mean, skill fade. Rescues and sports, a team should practice together. Yep. Get out and for me, when I teach rescue classes, it's you've got it, but you need to go back now and train and practice with your team, and get out and practice with your team. It was great to be with you guys when I was in the States to see your team working together on the river. So you've got to go out and practice once you've done the course.
Yep. Klube Dope Pava says, what about flip for fun?
No. No. I mean, flip for fun. Pre-brief your customers first. Ask them. I do it. Guys, do you mind if we flip here? Does anybody not want to? If you don't want to flip, you go on another boat. Go onto YouTube. There is do a search for "Don't Trust Your Children with These Operators." There's a whole documentary from a British guy who lost his daughter from Turkish guides flipping for fun in order to sell pictures with cameras. I've personally I've seen and I've heard of fatalities of guides flipping for fun, and the customers are not expecting it and they're not prepared for it, and you're just opening yourself wide up. Do I flip for fun? Yes, but I ask and I tell my customers first, and I give them the opportunity for an out to get out of the raft before we flip, and I make them aware of what to do when we flip.
And the rest of the guide. So the rest of the crew has to be on board too. You can't just flip for fun and have the guides be like, "Oh man, Zach flipped for fun again. Now we have to clean up the mess."
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I mean, after the class regular training.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
experience and judgment.
Yep. It's something that we historically haven't been great at, and we're trying to do. It's been especially hard during COVID though, because we're trying to minimize our contacts with each other. So to go train this last year has been really hard for training in general.
Mm-hmm.
And Willie Bum, this is probably on a comment from earlier where they train. I'm not sure what you're commenting about. Well, I have a couple more questions on my list, and then we can finish up, Mark. And I know it's late there, so you're ready to go to bed. I'm back on the global standards thing. Like, what are there certain standards that we, around the world can follow as guides? And one of them are paddle commands. Is there a certain set of paddle commands that are standards, or is it you just kind of do what you do?
No, and I don't encourage. I don't ever want to. I would never want to see a certain. I would never want to see that. It's down to the guide.
it's down to the guide, the language, the dialect. It's, you know, when I do a safety, when I'm a trip leader and I do a safety demonstration, and I'll stand up and I'll talk about all of the safety stuff, and then I'll disperse my crews, and then I will hand my crews over to my guides, and I'll let the guides do their own paddle commands, because what works for them doesn't necessarily work for me. So no.
We had this long I had this long talk with Aaron the other day about high side versus just calling over right, over left.
Or jump.
And
I call jump.
Jump right, jump left. Yeah. So we talked about all the, or you can say high side right, high side left. Like there's all kinds of things you can do instead of just the classic high side. But we were talking about the need for each of the guides in a pod to have similar commands, right?
Yeah.
So if one guide flips and somebody jumps in their boat and takes over, that they at least have some common understanding. The what?
It's the same with signals as well.
Yeah.
With rip signals, yeah.
Yep. So, I mean, so just to finish up with commands, do you think, because I want to get the signals in a second, with commands, are you saying like each guide group should have similar commands, or it's okay for each individual guide to have commands?
I work with some pretty competent guides. I work with some very incompetent guides. As long as they're getting the customers to get the boat down the river, whatever command works for them is the best. So, for instance, we've all heard left back, right forward, right back, left forward. If anyone's ever worked in New Zealand, there's a very famous raft guide there called the Chief. Unfortunately, no longer with us anymore. He used to call right turn, left turn. I could never do that, but this guy used to pull it off, right turn, left turn, and his crew used to, you know, they just used to do it, and you're like, wow, that is cool.
That's what I do. That's all. Yeah. That's what I learned, and that's all I ever do. You just train them on it.
Yeah,
and they just
go.
First
giving them the commands, it doesn't matter.
All right, we're gonna talk about signals in a second. That's the last question I have. But before we do, I want to get to some of these. Where are people from versus where they are trained?
Ooh. Yeah, it's as an assessor going into teaching courses, you know, you do a bit of digging. You get your candidates in front of you, you get your students, and you do a bit of digging. You find out where they're from, where they're trained, and you know, if you've got a bit of experience, you can generally build a picture as to what you're going to get quite early. So yeah, I mean, where somebody's from, you should never really hold that against them, or you can't really make any prejudice just from where they're from or where they're trained. But yeah, you can definitely pick things out.
Willie Bum Bum's Chief is a legend. Nice.
Yeah.
Alex, I've started commands, but I will adapt them if the crew has been rafting before and is familiar with. Yeah, I do the same thing. I have my commands. Like, so for us in Idaho, we're doing 6-day trips. I might do a paddle boat for 2 days, and another guide will do a paddle boat for 2 days. If I do right turn, left turn, other guides do right back, left forward, whatever. If I know they knew that already, I don't change it on them. I just go with what they've been doing for the past couple of days.
Yeah.
So I think adapting is huge. Maybe give specific set of commands during new guide training, then allow them to, yeah. I think the worry that Aaron and I had was that if you're a group again, 5 guides, if you have to take over somebody else's boat and you all of a sudden say right turn, and then the rest of your crew doesn't use that, you can't command that boat. That was just, or like if you jump in somebody's boat and yell high side and they were taught over right, over left, that's how it came up. So having your crew using the same high side versus over right, over left.
If you jump in a boat, if you've got that quick second, if you've got that quick second to go, all right, if I say forwards, I mean forwards. If I say backwards, I mean backwards. And just quickly run through them before you continue down.
Yeah. What I'll do is I'll say, what did so-and-so say to get you guys to turn? Yeah. That's like, because everybody's forward, back, and stop pretty much. But like, how did the last guide get you to turn? All right, cool, we're doing that.
If you've jumped in a boat for whatever reason because the original guide isn't in there, you've probably got to put that little red flag up in your head straight away as to why that guide's not guiding the boat now.
Yeah. Developing a guide voice style takes time and experience.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I teach a lot of guys to teach from the stomach, to talk from the stomach, give their commands from the stomach.
So Dean is asking, what's the best way to find work as a raft guide?
I think there are places in the UK where you can go move up the session, Dean. The Treryn up in North Wales, Cardiff, North Wales, they're both two huge IRF training centres. You can go shadow those guys with a level 2 guide. You won't be able to guide the raft commercially, but you can definitely go and shadow. Part of being a new guide is having to do that sit on process until you're good enough to be able to get to a level 3 assessment. So yeah, there are places. I started rafting in the UK.
Cool. And then Catfish writes lean right, left, and what is that a command? Lean right, left, and in.
Yeah. Leans for me, I'll use leans on artificial courses and lean in. That's used huge in the UK. Lean in instead of a hold on. Used in technical rivers quite a lot. But yeah, leans, I always tend to use leans on artificial courses more than on a river. Artificial courses, you've got strong eddy lines, generally boats with lower tube profile. So call an over, you'll probably flip. Call it lean, and you're probably just going to lift that tube enough so you catch it.
How about swear words in class 5 when it isn't looking good to get the crew motivated?
And it, yeah. I'll generally say, guys, if I swear, it means I need it. If I start swearing and not angry with you, I'm doing it to get a reaction.
I was watching I've been watching video from Rishikesh lately, like rafting videos from Rishikesh in India. And the guides, actually, the Indian guides will tap people on the head with a paddle to make them paddle.
Oh, yeah. Totally, yeah.
They're brutal.
Yeah.
So the last thing I want to bring up was whistles and how there might be global standards for whistles. And there's some more questions. I'll do these last. So, in the US, we have, at least on the West Coast, we have a certain set of signals. I know Colorado, some guides do things way different even. The IRF signals are even different than that. Should there be global standards for this? Are there global standards?
I think 3 continuous blast is a global standard for emergency. Would that be right? One blast for attention. And then depending where you go, 2 blasts and 3 blasts often get mixed up, and it makes my head spin out now even just thinking about it. So 2 blasts upstream, 3 blasts downstream.
I've never used that.
Yeah, it's more of a rescue, more of a rescue thing. What I will say to guides when I'm teaching courses is make sure it's a blast from your whistle, because guides get used to listening to the blast from a whistle. Whistles from fingers, from mouths. If you're working in a place where there's a lot of public watching and getting excited, especially with Asia and places like that, people get excited and they're whistling on the side of the river. You get lost as to, is that a guide whistling or is that an onlooker whistling? So for me, using that Fox 40 whistle and giving a distinct whistle blast is much better than somebody sticking their fingers in the mouth and doing a whistle.
We had a long debate about whistle blasts the other day on the podcast. And have you ever used 3 whistle blasts?
Yeah, I had to on a course not so long ago, actually. We had an agreed takeout above a class 5 canyon, and a kayaker decided to just paddle down and do the first bit of the class 5 canyon. Very good kayaker. But, I was at the takeout doing safety for the takeout, and kayaker just disappeared off downstream. And I got on the whistle, and because it was in a river that I operated on that much.
So that was like emergency, like, hey, this guy's gone.
Yeah.
Let's handle this. Have you, other than that, done 3 whistle blasts?
No.
Yeah. Aaron and I hadn't either. So we feel like it's really reserved for an emergency, not just like, hey, like it's really reserved, like it's a limit life and limb, not just like, the tuna salad fell off the table kind of thing.
No. I remember doing it and thinking this is the first time I've ever had to do this for real.
Yeah, but with the whistle, I feel like the global standards for whistle signals, you're right, like 1 for attention, 3 for emergency. But then what about all the other river signals, like stop, first aid, eddy out? Should there be global standard? I know IRF has a set of standards. Should those be global standards, or is it regional as well?
I mean, they're pretty much getting there with the global standard now. But what I would say is that as a group of guides working together before you get on the river, it doesn't matter what you use, but you all need to agree on it before you go down the river. So, we have the IRF signals that you can choose from, dip in and out of and use. But as a group of guides, if you've never worked before, before you get on the river, it takes 2 seconds, go, stop.
Eddy out.
Yeah.
Like, we use this for eddy out. In Colorado, they use this for speed up. Like 2 opposite things. So that's a big one.
Yeah.
All right, let's get through these. Guiding a boat revolves around I think that's the most overlooked part of guiding, is being able to prep your paddlers and communicate with them.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, 2 blasts for caution, 3 blasts for emergency. Yeah. After having a bunch of discussions about whistles over the past few weeks, and I did a bunch of research online, the problem with using 2 whistles, in my opinion, is that in a river environment, you can't always hear the whistles. The whistles actually doesn't travel as far as we think. So 2 whistles can be confused easily as 1 whistle or 3 whistles. So, I worry that if you do 2 whistles, somebody is like, was that 2 or was that 3?
Mm.
And I mean, I think that 1 is enough for caution.
Keep it as basic as possible.
It's tough. Is class 5 risk acceptable on commercial trips?
Class 5 by definition is if you get it wrong, there's a risk to life and injury, and an injury and rescue is hard. That's the definition of class 5. A lot of people say they raft class 5 and they sell a class 5 trip, but are they actually technically rafting class 5 rivers? And it's an ever-evolving question that's always asked. I'm sure there are some class 5 rivers that are rafted out there. I've worked on some tough rivers, and I think it's the way that you manage that risk.
Yeah, I mean, I think class 5 rafting with class 5 guides is like doing class 3 rafting with class 2 guides in terms of risk. Like with world-class guides, you can run some big stuff. Depends on how big it is, but like, Cherry Creek, the guides that work up there, a lot of them are spectacular. Like they run a very responsible trip, and that's definitely class 5, right? So I feel, and they do it day in, day out, no problem. So I think that it depends on the setup of the guides and the knowledge of the river and all that. Personally, companies, standard operators, yeah. I wonder if we would. So for me, Dustin, hand signals wouldn't go in our standard operating guidelines. It would, like, a standard operating guidelines is a different set of information. This would go in a document that explains how to run certain rapids, because it could change over time. Like if when we are running trips in Idaho sometimes, and a lot of Colorado guides are there, we might change the signals for that trip based on who's there. We're not gonna be like, oh, let's go look at our standard operating procedure of what signals we have to use. We might adapt the signals like we did a few years ago. I would always, in high water, I'd always be like, are you ready, to other guides? That's how I did it. And then Newman showed up and Allie, and they were like, just put your arm up. And when everybody's arm is up, we're ready to go. And we changed our signals for one trip because it was high water and it was super effective. So I feel like we should have a general set we use that's a guideline, but not like it wouldn't go in our operating plan.
An operating plan would say pre-departure meeting must include guide signals.
Yeah, exactly. That would go in the operating plan, like not what they are, but you have to cover them, right? The operating plan says carry a first aid kit, bring an extra paddle. Here's what goes in a safety kit. Here's where you meet. Here's where you end. Here's the standard of transportation. Here's the minimum age of people going on the trip. It's like very general stuff. The guidelines would have signals. One blast seems appropriate to an unplanned stop, first aid, or signal entire group. Yeah, I try not to blow my whistle.
Yeah.
If there's any other way to get told to somebody out, blowing whistle is my last.
It's also going to put people on edge and it panics them.
Yeah. I feel like, my thing is working with people who blow whistles too often. Whistles create a sense of urgency and adrenaline that I think can be bad. So I'm only going to use them when I want to create that sense of urgency. Yep. I'm going to call you when this is over, and we're going to talk about this a lot longer because I'm going to send you all this stuff. This is one of those long discussions we can have. Yep. We have guidelines. You see, I'll call you later. We'll talk about it. So, you've seen them. You know what I'm talking about. I'm going to send you the operating plan so you can look it over. The interesting thing about us for operating plans in the US is our agencies require them, but they require them in a really weird format. So we have the ones that the agencies want in their weird format, and then we have the ones that are actually useful. Right? This is where the government regulation isn't always good because they're just creating paperwork for us to fulfill their need, not the actual right document we need to be responsible owners. So I have one that's just written in the way that Forest Service wants it, and then one better one that has the same information and more that's written correctly. So that's a long answer. Well, Mark, I think we got through all the questions. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. This is really, Courtney, one more thing. I use my whistle if I can't get somebody's attention. Yeah, if you need to. Yep. So, Mark, thank you so much again I know it's late there, and I really enjoy taking time to do this. It's always fun to talk to you, and I appreciate everybody asking questions and being engaged and sharing this discussion. And if anybody out there has watched this after the live show and just watched it, on YouTube, you can comment down below and I'll forward them on to Mark, and hopefully Mark might be able to answer some of the questions on the YouTube channel. So yeah. Well, Mark, have a good night. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
And we'll see everybody next Monday at 12:30 Pacific.